In this video, we're going to be talking about the 10 purposes for pedagogical translanguaging, specifically focusing on purposes 1 through 5. This is a list that I've been creating with my colleague Sarah Hessen, who's an associate professor at Rhode Island College, as we've been engaging in translanguaging work together. But it really comes from many years of engaging with the research in the field and thinking about the central purposes that students can and should be leveraging their full linguistic repertoire to make meaning and to learn in the classroom. So these are 10 that we've come to identify as key as we think about what it looks like to create some of these more dynamic and holistic spaces for students to be languaging in our classrooms. So starting with purpose 1, a central purpose for translanguaging in the classroom is identity affirmation. As we've talked about in this course, language and identity are so intertwined. And so by bringing students full linguistic repertoires in the classroom, we are honoring who they are and affirming who they are fully, rather than asking them to leave part of themselves outside of the classroom, especially when they're in an English mainstream classroom. So one way that you can do that is through creating bilingual or multilingual books with students. This is an example you see here of a bilingual book created in a bilingual learning setting where all of the students were learning in and through English and Spanish. And you see I worked with a second grade teacher to have students first draft sentences in Spanish about the experience of being in a bilingual school. And then we worked together to translate those sentences into English. And they created this beautiful book with their illustrations, as you can see, that we then printed and had them let them take home with them so they could continue to share those books with their families. And it was just a really powerful affirmation of who these students were as bilingual children, because very often in bilingual programs, students are learning in one target language or the other, but rarely have an opportunity to leverage their whole bilingualism to create something. So this was a beautiful affirmation of that. But you can also do this in English mainstream classrooms. You can work with students to create poems and books about any topic where they're using their home language or home languages to create these books. You can do them as an entire class, or you can do them as with individual students creating their books or in small groups. I've worked with a teacher who they wrote a text in English about plants and then sent that book home or that text home and had families help their children translate it into their home languages and send them back so they could create a whole class book that showcased all of the languages that were in the classroom. And so it's just a really powerful way for students to see their identities, their linguistic identities represented in the classroom. Another way to affirm students' identities through translanguaging is to create language portraits, which you've had some firsthand experience with now. And as you know, this is a chance for students to reflect upon the linguistic languages that are part of their linguistic repertoire and to map them onto a body silhouette. And it's a great way for teachers to learn a little bit more about how students think about the languages that are part of their body, that are a part of who they are. It's also really powerful to post these in the classroom so that students can see one another's and obviously to share them with one another. So there's a constant visual reminder of who students are as lingual beings, as Nelson Flores would say, as lingual beings in the classroom. And finally, another pedagogy that you've already tried, the I am from or I come from poems are a great way to affirm who students are, both as people, but also as linguistic people, right, as lingual beings. And so this is an example from a third grade bilingual classroom where the third grade student brought all of her linguistic resources into this poem in a really powerful way, right? I am from mi abuela. I'm from my grandpa calling me hija ben. And you see the way she's moving across her linguistic repertoire as she writes this beautiful poem. All right, a second important purpose for translanguaging pedagogy is to activate students' prior knowledge. Too often, students are coming into our classrooms and they're having to leave part of what they know at the door, right? And a metaphor that I like to use for this is thinking about asking a student to take one of their arms and tie it behind their backs, and then come into the classroom and start writing. And for many students, we're actually asking them to take their dominant language and to tie it behind their backs, right? So for me, as a right-handed person, it would be as if I had to not use my right hand as I was writing and learning to write with with my left hand, right? That's kind of what's happening when we're not bringing students full linguistic repertoire into the classroom to support their learning. And so as we think about that in relation to prior knowledge, we think about trying to create spaces where students can use everything they know across across their full linguistic repertoire to tap into new learning, right? Or to think about what they know about a topic. One way you can do this is through bilingual or multilingual turn-in talks. In an English mainstream classroom, that would mean strategically pairing students who share a home language, if you can do that, and if you have that opportunity in the classroom, and being really explicit when you're saying that students are going to turn and talk to say everything that they know about a topic in whatever language they want to use, right? So if I was in a classroom and my students were learning about mammals, and I said, okay, I want you to turn and talk with your partner and use any language you want to share what you already know about mammals. That gives them a chance to tap into that full linguistic repertoire, to use both of their hands, right? Using that writing metaphor, to be able to think about what they already know about the topic. In a bilingual classroom, that means creating a more dynamic space for languaging as students process what they know. So oftentimes in bilingual settings, we have students learning in Spanish or learning in English or whatever the target languages are. And sometimes when we have a turn and talk, we might want them to try to stay in the target language. But here, if I'm trying to activate their prior knowledge and I want to just get all of the ideas that they have already about a topic, it makes sense to give them a space to do that bilingually, right? And to be really explicit in telling students, I know we're in Spanish time or I know we're in English time, but right now with your partner, I want you to use whatever language or languages you need to be able to share what you know about the topic. A related idea is a bilingual brainstorm. So again, it's kind of tapping into all of the knowledge that students have across their linguistic repertoire. This is an example from a bilingual classroom where you see the teacher had drawn an image of a lion, el león, and labeled it in English and Spanish. And then she had students think about all of the descriptive words they could think about in any language to describe this lion. So she emphasized that these are adjectives, adjetivos, and you can see all of the different words that they came up with to describe, right? So they're tapping into their prior knowledge around adjectives, they're tapping into their prior knowledge about lions, and creating this beautiful bilingual brainstorm, which is really just kind of a way to dump all of the knowledge that they have across their full linguistic repertoire onto this page. All right. Another great purpose for translanguaging is to support students in processing new information and to deepen and extend their learning. So again, our multilingual, bilingual students are coming in with all of these resources. And so by giving them access to learning as they're engaging with new information in multiple languages, we can support them in deepening their learning and better processing new information. One way to do this, particularly in a bilingual setting, is to think about how you might bridge resources from one language to another. This is a great example because we know that sometimes resources are hard to find in both languages. So if you're teaching in the Spanish side of a bilingual program, and you can only find an English video for this lovely New England mammal, the fisher cat or the fisher, but you really want to use it because you're learning about animals and you want students to learn about an animal that's local. What do, right? Do you just not use it because it's in English and you're in Spanish time? No, right? We can use this video. We can tell students as they're watching to take notes in any language. And then when I bring students back together, we can share out and I can bring their ideas into Spanish, right? So you see that this graphic organizer with appearance, habitat, diet, and additional information. So I can ask them to share out information. We can categorize it together and we can put their ideas into Spanish as they share out. So I'm bridging from one language, having this kind of translanguaging space of note-taking in any language, and then this beautiful sharing, also a translanguaging space where students are sharing what they've learned, and we're moving it into Spanish since that's our target language. A way you could think about doing this in a bilingual or in an English mainstream classroom is by providing students with bilingual or multilingual resources. So if my students are doing, they're engaging in a report unit where they're learning about planets, and each group of students is writing a report about a different planet. The group that's working on Mars, maybe I'll give them English resources and Spanish resources, right? And I'll say, learn about the planet in any language, take notes in any language, and the final report maybe will be in English, or maybe I'll even have it be a bilingual report, right? And they can create the report in English and Spanish. But I'm giving them access to the information in English and Spanish, because I know that that will help them tap into their full linguistic repertoire as they're learning this new content. All right, purpose 4 is holistic assessment. And so this is something that Ofelia Garcia and colleagues talk about quite a bit in our course text. It's, really gaining a deeper understanding of what students know by looking across their full linguistic repertoire when they're sharing the knowledge or skills that they have, right? This is a great example from a middle school classroom where you can see that the students were in a math class that was in English, and they're engaging with this math worksheet in English. But as they're showing what they know, they are able to use horas and millas, right? They're able to use their full linguistic repertoire to process the what's being asked of them, and then also to show that they understand and to show what they can do in math. So explicitly making spaces for this, telling students, you can show your work in any language, right? You can respond to this, engage with this in any language, allows you to get a deeper understanding of what students can do. Another example of this that I'm going to show you is a video from a special education teacher at Nuestro Mundo in Providence, where she, I think, did a really beautiful job of giving the student space to process in both languages while he's showing her what he's able to do in math. So she's working with him in Spanish, but you can see he's drawing upon English and Spanish as he's making meaning, and it creates this really beautiful space for him to kind of come to an understanding of the concept that they're working with and also show what he can do. So I'll play that for you.
Oh! ¿Cuántas filas hay? Dale. Muy bien, Luca, explícame la propiedad conmutativa. ¿Qué le pasa? ¿Qué hacemos con la propiedad conmutativa?
Is rich.
Muy bien, cambiamos los números. Porque 7 por... Míralo. 7 por 5 igual a 35. ¿Y qué has hecho ahí?
5
por
7
igual a
35.
Muy bien. ¿Y qué pasa con esta matriz? Sí, se la voy a mandar a tu mamá. Escúchame, ¿qué pasa con la matriz? Para que sea 5 por 7, ¿qué pasa? Mira lo que hacemos con la matriz. ¿Qué cambia? Le damos la vuelta. Y ahora hay 5 filas.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
¿Con cuántos tiene cada fila?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, ¿qué ha pasado?
Cambio.
Tienes... No tienes 7. Esta le falta aquí una. Este es de aquí. Ahí. No, este es el pompón. El 7. Ahí.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
7. 5 filas con 7 pompones. Y si le damos otra vez la vuelta, mira, la propiedad conmutativa. Mira. Ahora, ¿qué tenemos? 7
Filas
con 5
columnas.
con 5 columnas.
Right. And I love this example because I think it shows so clearly how the student is processing across English and Spanish and bringing his full linguistic repertoire to the task of understanding this mathematical property. And you see how the teacher isn't saying, no, don't use English, don't count in English, right? She's making space for him to be processing, even though it's, Spanish class and he's supposed to be thinking and working in Spanish, but she's creating this more holistic space where she can see what he's able to do. And he's also able to kind of process in a deeper way because he's able to bring his full linguistic repertoire in. So for those of you who teach in English mainstream classrooms, think about where students have spaces like this, right? Where they can be processing by drawing upon their full linguistic repertoire and showing you what they can do across their full linguistic repertoire. All right, and finally, purpose 5 is to support metalinguistic awareness. So creating translanguaging spaces is a great way to support students in deepening their knowledge about language in general. One way that I like to do this is through root word walls or root word activities because it helps students to see it helps them to grow their vocabulary because they're learning about a root, what a root word means, and then they can apply it to many contexts, but also helps them to see the way that language is connected. 30 to 40% of words in English and Spanish are cognates, which means that they look similarly, they're pronounced the same or similarly, and they mean the same thing. So if you can help students tap into learn about roots so they gain a better understanding of these different Latin and Greek roots and how they work in different words in English, it also supports them in making those connections with Spanish or other, if they speak other Latin-based languages. So here you see an example of starting with bio, life, and having students brainstorm all of the words they can in English and in Spanish or across their linguistic repertoire that use bio. And so you see examples like biology, biography, and the definitions, right? Biography is the story of someone's life, whereas biology is the study of life. Biofuel, a fuel that comes from living matter. So lots of ways you can support them in better understanding these different pieces of language and how they work, while also tapping into their full linguistic repertoire. So with that, we're going to end this video. I hope you enjoyed learning about purposes 1 through 5, and I look forward to seeing how you apply this in your own context.